Mr. President, I ask that the next statement I make be a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I've been listening to criticism from the other side of the aisle about our plan to improve American families' economic security and interest in the long term and to strengthen our economy. And I have to wonder, why do Republicans never worry about deficits when they're passing trillion-dollar tax cuts that shower nearly all of the benefits on millionaires and wealthy corporations? Why do Republicans only rediscover a concern about the debt when they're asked to support policies to help middle class, working families, low-income individuals? These are people struggling to get into the middle class. Or when someone proposes a long-term solution to make America's economy more resilient and more prosperous for everyone, they're opposed to it. That's big spending. Republican welfare for the rich has always been a bad investment. 40 years of trickle-down economics has given America the greatest income inequality since the Gilded Age in our history and the largest national debt in our history. Republicans' devotion to trickle-down tax cuts has given us a shrinking middle class, a hollowed-out industrial base, and crumbling infrastructure. It has made a small sliver of lavishly wealthy people in our country and left the rest behind. The Republican economic agenda has left the majority of Americans asking, how are we supposed to pay for child care, our kids' college education, medical bills, or for the skilled nurses that mom and dad are going to need? Will we ever be able to retire? Trickle-down economics doesn't have answers for those real-life questions, but our Republican colleagues keep doubling down on it. I predict, without fear of contradiction, now that we have a Democratic president, someone on the Republican side of the aisle will come around again with a balance the budget constitutional amendment. It happens without fail. The Republicans always turn to that whenever there's a Democratic president, even though the debt that president inherited was historic. And when their trickle-down tax cuts add trillions to our national debt, are they really worried? They never say a word about deficit and debt until they're in the minority. Donald Trump proposed more than $1 trillion in tax cuts, with most of the benefits going to wealthy corporations and individuals. Did the Republicans complain about the national debt then? No. Did they insist that such an expensive gift must have bipartisan support? No. They passed their trickle-down tax cut through reconciliation without a single Democratic vote. Donald Trump promised that his tax cut would be, quote, rocket fuel for the economy. Well, that may be a rare Trump boast that turned out to be true, although not exactly the way he meant it. We now have a handful of billionaires who've decided to launch their own personal space programs. They are so wealthy that they are racing each other into space, while regular working people worry about rent, child care, and getting on here on Earth. The Trump tax cut gave the wealthiest Americans a fat windfall. According to Americans for Tax Fairness, the nation's 651 billionaires saw their net worth spike by more than $1 trillion during the first 9 months of the pandemic, while the rest of America worried about how to pay the bills with a smaller paycheck or no paycheck at all. After Donald Trump signed his tax bill, surrounded by quite a few of my Republican colleagues in the Senate, he headed to a Christmas Eve dinner at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. And like Santa Claus, he announced to the wealthy members of his own private club at Mar-a-Lago, you all just got richer. That was the real effect of the Trump tax cuts and a real intent. The Congressional Budget Office estimated in 2018 that Trump tax cuts will add $1.9 trillion to the national debt over 11 years. Where is the Republican outcry over that? The notion of $3 trillion to help working families pay less for the essentials of life, cut their taxes, give them an opportunity to be in an economy creating jobs, is really pales in comparison to the $1.9 trillion in tax cuts to the wealthy. Economists at the London School of Economics recently analyzed the economic effects of trickle-down tax cuts in 18 wealthy nations over 50 years, 1965 to 2015. You know what they found? Trickle-down tax cuts consistently benefit the wealthy, but had no meaningful effect on unemployment or economic growth, and they led, inevitably, to wider economic inequality. The authors of the study were asked why some politicians still keep pushing for these tax cuts for the wealthy people. They pointed to one major reason: the power of wealthy individuals and corporations to set policy agendas through their lobbying and campaign contributions. Mr. President, you know what's going on with dark money in this country. The fabulously wealthy people, embarrassed in doing so through mystery money and dark money, contribute to politicians and to causes that support their lifestyle, but they don't want us to know. Is that why no Republican senators support President Biden's Build Back Better plan to help American families and our economy? Because billionaires have more lobbyists and deeper pockets than struggling kids and families? Two renowned economists at Princeton University, Alan Blinder, former vice chair of the Federal Reserve, and Mark Watson, looked at the major economic indicators of America's economy for every president over the last 80 years, all the way back to Franklin Roosevelt. They found that by almost any major indicator, gross domestic product, employment, incomes, productivity, even stock prices, America's economy has grown significantly faster under Democratic presidents than Republican. On jobs, since 1933, the 6 presidents who presided over the fastest job growth have all been Democrats. The 4th presidents with the slowest job growth, Republicans. Donald Trump campaigned for president promising to be, quote, the greatest jobs president God ever created. When he left office, there were 3 million fewer jobs than when he started. Of course, we understand the pandemic played a major role in that. But he's the first president since Herbert Hoover to lose jobs on his watch. Democrats are once again cleaning up the Republican mess. With the help of the American Recovery Plan, which not a single Republican senator, congressman supported, America's economy has added 4 million jobs during the first 6 months of Joe Biden's presidency. That's the fastest growth for the start of any president ever in American history. Here's another economic fact from the National Bureau of Economic Research. Between 1953 and 2020, America's economy was in recession for 23% of the time that the Republicans held the White House, compared to 4% of the time that a Democrat sat in the Oval Office. Back to deficits and debt. For the last 40 years, Republican presidents have run up larger deficits than Democrats. Let me say that again. In the past 40 years, Republican presidents have run up larger deficits than Democratic presidents. Donald Trump ran for president promising to get rid of the national debt in 8 years through trade policy. Instead, his trade policy was a costly disaster, and the national debt skyrocketed by more than $7 trillion during his tenure. ProPublica and Washington Post analysis found that growth in the annual deficit under Donald Trump ranks as the 3rd biggest increase relative to the size of the economy of any U.S. president, with his tax cut being the major culprit. I could go on citing facts and figures, but the point is obvious. Democrats believe in investing into human priorities like quality child care, education, medical research, renewable energy, and climate resilience. Investments actually grow the economy, raise wages, and living standards for everyone. We should have no apologies as Democrats for the investments we're making in the future, particularly when it comes to climate change. That is a fact of life, sadly, in America. And we see the results reported every night on the news, whether it's fires or extraordinary weather events. They're happening with increased frequency. It seems the Republicans ignore that reality. We cannot afford as a nation to do that any longer. History shows that our approach has worked in responding to many of these challenges. Our solutions produce a stronger, more sustainable economic growth that benefits everyone. Stronger economic growth allows us to pay down our debt rather than continuing to add to it with more tax cuts for the top 1%. Republicans can refuse to support our plan to build back better. That's their choice. But please spare us lectures about fiscal responsibility. There's nothing responsible about repeating the same trillion-dollar mistake over and over and making small businesses and working families pay for it. Mr. President, I always thought the Laffer curve, which is the inspiration to the Republicans for trickle-down economics, was the most appropriately named economic device in history. It's a Laffer, and we've seen over and over again why it is. Giving tax breaks to the wealthy may make for a happy Christmas at Mar-a-Lago, but not for the rest of America. We want to invest in this nation, first in the infrastructure, and we're on a path to do it. I see the senator from Delaware is here, Senator Carper. And I just want to tell him the real test is not just whether we put votes on the board, and that is the bottom line in the Senate, but whether the center will hold, whether or not we have a strong enough center in the Senate dedicated to responsible investment in infrastructure and can overcome the forces outside. Former President Trump has been making all these speeches about how bad it is to have an infrastructure program. Well, I'd just like to remind the former president, he had no infrastructure program. Talked big, delivered nothing. Now we have a chance under President Biden to have one that is bipartisan in nature and truly will help this economy and this country over the long run. In addition, I believe that we have to move further, and we certainly will with the budget resolution, in investing in America. The notion of having childcare, quality childcare, available and affordable to families is something that, unless you're a grandparent or a parent and know the reality, you may overlook and shouldn't. It is a critical factor in family welfare and good outcomes for children. In addition, 2 extra years of education beyond the 12th grade provided by our quality community colleges across America is the ticket for better jobs and better training and better workers in the 21st century. As we stand here, our major challenge, I suppose, nemesis, foe, is China. Some of us can remember something called ping-pong diplomacy, which occurred when I was roughly coming out of college. That was kind of opening up Red China, we called it Red China then, to the world and giving them an opportunity to compete and to be part of the world conversation. And it happened dramatically. I remember visiting China several times, and first time watching them in their Mao jackets on bicycles, taking their kids to school, and then what I found in future visits or later visits, a really developed economy. The Chinese have a plan. They are mercantilist first, and they are marketing around the world successfully, because they have a plan. We don't have a plan, not until this president arrived. President Joe Biden has started this plan by saying, first, we invest in our people and make certain that their lives are easier to be led and successful. I support him completely in that effort. I hope many will. It should be bipartisan. If we have sympathy for the wealthiest in our country, I beg my Republican friends, have some sympathy for the middle-income families who are struggling every day to get by. Mr. President, I yield the floor.